give you guys something to do over the weekend. YouTube, hair. It's a weird song. All right, so we like to consider ourselves as human beings. We like to consider ourselves as relatively hairless. Compared to other animals, we do at least seem to be relatively hairless. The truth is that we do have hair on most areas of our body. It's easier to list the places we don't have hair than the places that we do. We do not, for example, have hair on the palms of our hands or on the soles of our feet. We do not have hair on the sides of our fingers and toes. We do not have hair on the side surfaces of our feet. Top of the feet, yeah. Sides of the feet, no. We do not have hair on our lips, on our nipples, on the labia minora, on the clitoris, on the glands of the penis, or on the foreskin of the penis. And that's it. Every place else on our body, we have some kind of hair. Now, like the melanocytes, the number of hairs in various parts of the body can vary. So on our torsos and arms and legs, we typically have about 55 to 70 hairs per square centimeter. But on the face and scalp, as you might imagine, the number's a little higher. It's between 600 to 800 per square centimeter. Now, the hair is produced in a structure called a hair follicle. And your textbook has very detailed illustrations of the anatomical structure of a hair follicle, but the only one I got as a transparency was this one, which is at pretty low magnification. It actually shows up better on the screen than it does by itself, right? So here's the epidermis, here's the dermis, here's the blood vessels, and this structure here is the hair follicle. There's a couple of different parts to this. What we would think of as the hair that emerges above the surface of the epidermis, that's the thing that is called the hair shaft. So the actual hair is technically called the hair shaft. And it will grow up above the level of the epidermis. The lower portion of the hair follicle is called the hair root. That's the part that is below the surface of the epidermis, down here. the hair grows, the hair is produced in a manner very similar to what we see with the epidermis of the skin. Now, since I don't have a enlarged picture of this, I'm going to have to draw it. So down at the bottom of the hair root is an area called the hair bulb, which is where the hair is actually being made. Now, I am simplifying the bejeebers out of this because I can't draw it with all of its complicated glory, but I think we can get the basic idea across here. Most of this hair bulb is epithelial tissue, which is to say that it doesn't have any blood vessels. But you'll notice it's got this kind of weird bell-shaped structure. Wish I had my red pen, but I don't. This down here is dermis. And the dermis does have blood vessels. And so for each of the hair follicles, there is a little set of blood vessels that kind of comes through into this little projection of the dermis. This little projection here, right here, is called the dermal papilla. Remember what papilla means?
Bump.
Bump. So we have a little bump of dermis that's kind of formed in this invagination of the epithelial tissues of the hair bulb. These cells are getting so these cells along here are getting plenty of oxygen and nutrients. They're very well supplied with everything they need to live happy lives, to grow, and to reproduce. Bless you. So these cells that are here by the dermal papilla are going to reproduce and divide fairly often. They're going to make new cells that are going to push out into the space of the hair bulb. And so what's going to happen here is that new cells are going to keep being added as these hair bulb cells are reproducing, and the older cells are going to get pushed up away from the papilla and compacted together. These cells are very much like keratinocytes. They make that same protein keratin. So as these cells from the hair bulb mature, they're making keratin, they're becoming dehydrated, they're flattening out and compressing together. And so as these guys get squeezed together and die, they're going to form the hair shaft. So they're going to flatten, they're going to dry out, they're going to die, they're going to get compressed. They are now going to form the hair shaft, which is going to keep being added onto from below. So as new cells are added, the older cells, the shaft cells, are getting pushed up the length of the follicle. So down here at the hair bulb is where the new cells are being added on, and then as this matures and dries out and dies, it gets pushed further and further up. By the time the hair shaft actually emerges above the epidermis, there is no living tissue there. All of this is dead. All of this is keratin, which is why it doesn't hurt when you cut it off. And it regrows because the cells down here are still alive and are still adding on new cells. There are also cells down here at the bulb that are going to add color to the cells of the hair shaft. They're going to add in pigments so that as the shaft comes up, it will have color to it. Brown, black, that's our old friend melanin. Blonde is a variation on melanin called pheomelanin. It's like a mutated form of melanin that isn't quite so brown. So it comes across macroscopically when we look at our hair with our naked eyes as kind of a yellowy color. Red is a pigment called trichosiderin. What? She was laughing at me. Now, these are controlled by different genes. So a person can have the genes for brown, black hair, brunette hair. They can also have the genes for blonde color. If they've got both, the brown color will kind of tend to disguise the blonde, although they might have highlights. And you can also have the gene for red color, and that gives us some of the weird variations. Like, if you have the blonde and the red, you get strawberry blonde. That kind of yellowy pink red color that some people have. If you have the brown and the red, you get a combination called Titian, in which the hair will look mostly brunette unless light hits it just the right way, and then the red highlights show up. These are very beautiful. So it comes away.
So I have two questions for you.
Okay.
Then what about gray hair?
That was coming next.
Okay.
All right.
Sorry.
Yeah.
All right.
Gray hair. Gray hair, of course, we associate with aging. Most people do not start life with gray hair. What's happening with gray is that these cells that are adding in the pigments are kind of doing it some days but not others. They're starting to stutter. You have sporadic deposition of color. So some of these cells will have color added, and then the next day the new cells don't, and then the day after that they don't, and then the day after that they do, or they get some color over here and not so much color over here. If you take a gray hair and put it under the microscope, it actually has spots. So gray hair is due to sporadic pigment deposition. And this is, like I said, comes with age. That the cells are just becoming senile, they're becoming forgetful, they took the day off. In what? Well, their hair follicle is older than it looks. It is actually, there is such a thing as premature gray hair. And so even young people may have the occasional gray hair starting to come in. Mine started to turn that gray color when I was 25. Yeah, it runs in my family. Everybody in my family gets premature gray hair. So yes, it can happen follicle by follicle like that. It doesn't happen all at once. It tends to kind of go a little bit here, a little bit there. Some this year, some next year. Yeah.
Sorry, another question.
Go ahead.
Well, on my beard, I have a lot of blonde and reddish hairs.
Very
bleached
common.
by the sun, right? So what happens to the hair follicle? Like, if it's not a it's not chemically dyed, so why did it change pigment?
It's very common among men to have their beard color a different color than their scalp hair. It can, in fact, be very extreme, where you have someone who's a brunette on top and has a bright red beard. Hair growth, I was going to get to that eventually. Hair growth is strongly influenced by hormones, in particular testosterone. And so men have beard hair because they have higher levels of testosterone. And it's probably influencing what color among your available color genes, which ones are being used.
Well, it used to be all black.
Yeah,
So-
that changes with age.
Okay, but the environment can change it as well.
To some extent, nutrition plays a role in this. And again, as you said, UV light, sunlight can bleach hair the same way it will bleach color out of your clothing.
I guess then my question is, how does it permanently stay bleached? You know, I mean, because when we bleach our hair, you know, it eventually turns back to its natural color. But these have never turned back to black. You know, it just continues being
Again,
blonde.
it's probably hormonal. It's probably your level of testosterone that's influencing which color genes. Let me just finish up one thing and we'll go back to this, all right? Because I wanted to talk about white. Gray and white are not the same thing. White is simply the absence of pigment. If those hair follicles stop putting in pigment altogether, what you get is keratinized cells. And keratin doesn't have any color, so the hair shaft appears colorless. It appears white. Okay, let's go back to the business of why does it change. Right? One of the things that's going through my mind is that it's fairly common for people who've had cancer and who've undergone chemotherapy. Their hair all falls out, right? Because the drugs that are used for chemotherapy are supposed to suppress cell division. If you suppress cell division, your hair falls out and doesn't grow back while you're taking those drugs. So when they finish chemotherapy and their hair starts to grow back, many people will report changes in the color of their hair or in the texture of their hair or both. The hair that grows back is not the same hair that they lost before they started the chemotherapy. It's as if the cells have been reset to choose different genes from their available chromosomal menu. So for example, straight hair and curly hair, people might have both genes for that. But during fetal development and childhood, the straight hair genes were the ones that the follicles were accessing. But now, because of the drug influence, they've shifted over and now they're using the curly hair genes. So the hair comes out curly or dry or brittle or something. And color changes are very common as well. So in a less dramatic way, that's probably what's happened, is that your hair follicles, influenced by your hormone levels, by other environmental factors, have kind of shifted over into which colors they're going to make. It's not a sign of any kind of disease or disability, but it's also fairly common that beard hair and head hair just don't match. And of course, you've seen the commercials on TV for those just for men hair coloring things, where their beard has gone gray, but their head hair is still a normal color. So they want to comb in color on their beard so they don't look so old. Yeah. Again, that's not an uncommon situation where The beard hair will age faster than the scalp hair. The beard hair follicles go gray sooner. Okay. So you got a lot of color choices out there. And then of course you run into the problem of people change their hair color. The color you're seeing is not their genetic color, it's the one they chose at the drugstore. Okay, now we also have 3 types of hair. Actually, there's a lot of subtypes. So we have 3 main types of hair. These are called, I never know how to pronounce this. Lanugo, Lanugo, not too sure. This is the first hair you get. This develops in fetal life. So usually during the 2nd and 3rd trimester of the fetus's life in utero, they will develop this hair. And it can be just on their head, and it can be all over their body. Right? Typically, this stuff is shed just before or just after birth. The baby may be born with this hair, and the parents get all excited because they're like, oh, my baby is so smart, my baby is so evolved, my baby was born with a full head of hair, and then a month later they're bald as a cue ball. That all fell out. And then they're not quite so chatty anymore about how wonderful their baby is with all the wonderful hair. It falls out in the uterus just before birth or just after birth when the baby's out. It's not permanent hair, and it's not meant to be. Then we have something that's called vellus hair. These hairs tend to be short, very fine, and usually kind of on the pale side. This is typically what we think of as our body hair. And then we have what's called terminal hair. This is the longer, thicker, usually darker hair of our scalp, eyebrows, eyelashes, the pubic region, the axillary region, and in men, the chest, beard, arms, and legs. So again, one of the effects of puberty is that as testosterone levels go up, the vellus hair in these areas is converted into terminal hair. Women, not so much testosterone. We hopefully keep most of our vellus hair on our face, arms and legs, and chest. Oh, let me show you this picture. This is a cool picture. I was going to show this to you a little while ago and I forgot. It was sitting right here in front of me. All right, this is a super high magnification electron micrograph of a hair shaft just as it's emerging above the epidermis. And one of the things I like about this picture is it really shows you those flattened, scale-like overlapping cells of keratinized cells that form the bulk of the shaft. You can really see how those have been layered and plastered up against each other, and they're very tough and they're very firmly attached to each other. I just think that's a really good picture.
So another question for you. Like,
Okay.
you were saying that the skin is really sensitive to pain.
Mhm.
Those receptors. So like when you're tweezing your eyebrows or you accidentally pull a row of hair, is it because you're pulling the bulb and it's sending out that reaction, or what causes?
I believe so. The follicle itself doesn't seem to have a whole lot of sensory receptors associated with the follicle, but the surrounding dermis is going to have pain receptors and touch receptors. You feel the tug when you're tweezing, and if you pull it enough so that you're going to break the blood vessels, you've caused tissue damage, and that'll set off the pain receptors. Pain receptors are usually triggered by cellular damage. So if you break open the blood vessels, or you're pulling up the glands and the muscle and so on with the whole rest of the follicle, you know, if you pull up the root, pull it up by the root, you get more than just the shaft. You've caused enough damage, you'll set off the pain receptors. And of course, certain areas of your skin have more sensory receptors than others. So some parts of your skin are more sensitive than others, including the area around your face. So, you know, you can tweeze hair out of your arms and just like, you pull the same amount of pressure on an eyebrow or eyelash, and you're going to feel it a lot more. All right, growth, hair growth. Hair does not grow continuously. Those hair root cells are not constantly dividing at an even rate. It kind of goes in cycles. So we have periods of rapid growth, followed by periods of rest, in which there is little or no cell division occurring. Now, your textbook goes into much more detail than this, and I don't think that we really need to dig down to the names of these phases and all that kind of stuff. All right. Overall, on average, during the growth phase, the hair shaft will have about 2 millimeters added to it per week. Although, again, this is variable. Different hairs on different parts of our body grow at somewhat different rates. The scalp, for example, grows faster than body hair. During the resting phase, the existing hair shaft, the shaft that's already there in the follicle, will be held in the follicle. So it will stay where it is, and it isn't going to have any more added onto it. Then when the next growth cycle starts, this hair shaft will fall out. The old shaft is released, and a new shaft is begun. So at the beginning of the next growth phase, the old shaft is released and will fall out. Now, not only is hair growth discontinuous, it grows and then it stops, and then it grows and then it stops, but it's also asynchronous. Different hair follicles are at different points in the cycle all over your body. So this hair follicle is just starting its growth phase. The next one over is in the middle of a growth phase. This one over here is at the end of the growth phase. That one's just starting a resting phase. That one's in the middle of a resting phase. That one's getting to the end of the resting phase. They're not coordinated in their activity in this way. And so as different follicles go into their resting phase and then go back into their next growth phase, we're constantly losing hairs. they estimate that the average adult loses about 90 scalp hairs every day. And like dander, you're probably not aware of it. You shake your head, you run your fingers through your hair, you brush your hair, you comb your hair, you wash your hair, you lie down in your bed, you get back up, you lean back in the Barca lounger, you get up to get a beer. You know, as you're moving around, the hair comes out, and you might notice one or two on your shoulder, or you might notice a few in the hairbrush, but you're not really aware that you're losing 90 every day. It just kind of doesn't really make an impression.
It certainly seems like you lose a lot more than it grows. But like when you notice when you take a shower and you just like, you know what I mean? Like,
well, you're a guy.
I don't know, but
It's different for men because there's this little thing called male pattern baldness.
yeah.
So men your age are actually losing more hair if they're genetically going to have male pattern baldness. It's a genetic condition.
Well, even
You actually are losing more hair than you're growing back. I can sympathize with you because now that I'm past menopause, my hair's coming out too.
Mhm.
But you're going to keep yours for another 20 or 30 years, so aren't you happy? Right? So, yeah, but it's, yeah, when you say, doesn't it seem like what's the we, Kimosabi? It's you. All right. The length of the growth cycle varies a lot. With scalp hairs, an entire cycle can go anywhere from 4 to 8 years. While other terminal hairs like brows and lashes will have a growth cycle of only 3 to 4 months. That's why the hair on your head gets so much longer than your eyebrows and eyelashes, because it's going to grow for, say, 6 years before it stops. Whereas your brows and lashes are only going to grow for a few weeks before they stop. And then they're going to fall out a lot faster. So actually you lose eyebrows and eyelashes a lot faster than scalp hairs.
So the people that are like in the Guinness Book of Records and stuff like that who have,
Enormously long hair.
is that just like a genetic abnormality that they can grow it that long?
You know, I get asked about that. Right now there's that commercial on TV with the guy who's got hair that's like 30 years long.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What are they
Geico,
selling
isn't
in
it?
that commercial?
Isn't it Geico? I'm pretty sure it's Geico.
Okay, yeah, you're probably right. It's probably Geico. They have the weirdest commercials. But in real life, one of the famous people for having really long hair is the country western singer Crystal Gayle. Her hair, the last time I saw a picture of it, actually reached all the way down to the floor. She claims that it's because of her routine of hair care, that she doesn't brush or comb it every day, because that obviously is going to put enough pressure to yank them out, that she wears it in a braid unless she is displaying the hair, and that she's taken, like, she uses special products and takes really, really good care of it, and gets plenty of sleep, drinks plenty of water, has a healthy lifestyle. She's a music person, and you kind of wonder about that. Don't they all do drugs and stay up all night? Yeah. Aren't they all country western people? I mean, you know, Willie Nelson, come on. So, but she claims it's because of her routine for hair care, that she's taking special care not to cause any breakage or damage, and that she's also not putting a lot of pressure on her scalp. It does seem to be an abnormality. Most people can't grow their hair that long, no matter how hard they try. It will fall out. So hair down to your waist or down to your buttocks is about what most people can manage.
And now, how come braiding stimulates hair growth or makes it grow faster?
I don't know that it does, but it does prevent damage or breakage. So it kind of puts the hair together so it's protected from abrasion you don't brush your braid. You don't comb out your braid. It does seem to protect. I don't know that it actually makes the hair grow faster, but it does keep it from breaking off, which will also appear as if the hair has gotten shorter. Okay. What was I saying?
Isn't there such a thing as like an eyelash mite or something like that?
Yes, there
So
is.
it's supposed to help keep the lash like overgrown.
They don't help with that. They're a symbiote that lives down in the hair follicles of your eyelashes and eyebrows. They're little microscopic mites, and they feed on the oils and the dead skin cells, but they're not helping you in any way. There's no benefit to them. Yeah, they just live on you. They're freeloading. That's exactly right. You're secreting stuff that they will eat. So they climb down in there and they just live in there.
But
They come out at night and crawl around on your skin and breed, and then they go back in during the morning.
So, but then they have to waste products as well,
Yeah.
don't they? So what do they produce on us as a waste product?
Well, we haven't talked about the glands yet, but your hair follicles also have sebaceous glands, and this oil will kind of flush out their waste across your skin. So their waste is probably part of the oil on your face.
Okay. No, I'm just
That is the recommendation, that if you don't like the idea of having follicle mites, that soap is supposed to be the most effective agent against them. Wash your face with soap at least once a day. Get onto the eyebrows and the eyelashes, so the soap will and they don't like it, so you'll reduce the population. May not get rid of all of them, but at least there won't be hundreds of them crawling around your face at night.
Yeah, that isn't that also horrible because it starts to dry out your skin and causes some not
Well, you can have dry skin or you can have mites. Yeah, I don't think there's I don't think you can go get like Rid-X or something to get rid of your follicle mites. All right.
Like what? No, I'm good. I'm just thinking if the dust mites and this, if
Follicle
they
mites
ever fight for the same
Yeah,
territory.
but we're not
resources.
talking about a serious parasitic problem. It's not like scabies that's going to cause disease.
Right.
They're just hanging out on you because you're a good source of food. You don't like them? Vacuum and wash with soap. All right. Now, you may have noticed this little guy over here attached to the follicle. This is actually a little band of smooth muscle. Associated with their hair follicles are little muscle structures called the Hilow erector muscles. Also called the erector pili muscles. These are smooth muscle. One end of the smooth muscle structure is attached to the hair follicle, and the other end is anchored into the collagen fibers of the dermis. And you'll notice that they're kind of at an angle here. Okay? Again, I apologize for the fact that I can't draw. Right? So when you are just looking at your hair, on your arms, on your legs, typically the hair is emerging from the epidermis at an angle. So the hair lies down sort of flat. Now, these muscles are at an angle, And muscles contract, they get shorter. When the erector pili muscles or piloerector muscles contract, the overall effect is to pull the follicle into a more upright position. So when they contract, the hair stands up on end.
So it's not a ghost animal. It's not a ghost animal.
No. And this is called piloerection. You might be interested to know that in Latin or Greek, pili means hair. Now, other animals have this feature as well. Birds have piloerector muscles attached to their feathers. Mammals have piloerector muscles attached to their fur or their hair. So when these muscles are stimulated in birds and mammals, what we get is the hair is going to end up trapping little pockets of air between the skin and the hair. The warmth of the skin will warm up this air pocket, and it provides a form of thermal insulation. The hair will keep the air trapped against the skin so that wind isn't going to blow it away. And so you're going to end up with this nice little this layer of warm air right against your skin. It's going to help keep the bird or the mammal warm when it's cold. Our hair isn't thick enough to do that. Piloerection in humans will occur when we get cold. You walk into a room that's chilly, your hair stands on end. And you can see the effect because as the muscle pulls on the hair follicle and the skin, it raises these little ridges on the skin that we call goosebumps. Some people call them goose pimples. Some people call them goose flesh. We have the same reflex to being cold as any bird or mammal. But because our hair is thin and wispy and short, it just doesn't do us any good at all. So we get piloerection, but we don't get any thermal insulation out of it. So cold is one of the things that will trigger this. Another thing that will trigger piloerection is fear or other strong emotions such as anger, but mostly fear. When you walk into the room and your cat wasn't expecting you, they get all fluffed up, right? Or when your dog hears a noise outside and they start barking and growling, their hair stands up. They're angry, they're fearful, they're upset emotionally. That makes their hair stand on end. Again, it works for us too. Human beings get fearful, they get anxious, they're watching a scary movie, they're trying to get through the parking lot when all the lights have gone out. You get worried, you get nervous, you get anxious, there's buggers, there's rapists, there's burglars, there's murderers, there's pirates. You know. Your hair stands on end. People say, oh, I felt the hair on the back of my neck go up. I was so scared. Oh, my flesh was just creepy because I was so scared. Now, in animals, birds and mammals, this kind of reaction makes the hair stand all the way out. It gets all big and fluffy, and the animal looks bigger, right? By getting themselves all fluffed up like that, they look less like lunch and more like a threat. Don't you mess with me, predator. Don't you mess with me. I can take you on. I'm too big for you to snack on. again, with human beings, we've got no threat display. Our hair's too thin, it's too wispy, it just doesn't work. We get the same reflex response. Our hair stands up, we get the goosebumps, but nobody else can see it. So you look just as much like a snack to that cougar, that Florida panther, the 16-foot alligator. They don't care how much your hair is standing up on end, they can't see it. So it doesn't work as a threat display, it doesn't work as thermal insulation, but the muscles are there and the reflexes are there, and it works the same way as it does in your dog, your cat, or your pet canary. You get cold, your hair stands on end. You get scared, your hair stands on end. Just doesn't do you any good. So that pretty much takes us through hair. All right, let's talk about some of the glands that are part of the integumentary system. We've talked about one already, kind of in a roundabout way. These are the sebaceous glands. These are associated with hair follicles. So here's the hair follicle, here's the sebaceous gland here. They are simple acinar glands with a apocrine type secretion. They vary somewhat in size. The largest ones are on our face, neck, and upper chest. What the sebaceous glands secrete is a material called sebum. This is a very oily substance. It's composed of lipids and cell debris, the apocrine type of secretion. It also contains some proteins and salts. Now, what happens here is that the gland is down here in the dermis. It secretes the sebum into the hair follicle onto the hair shaft. And then this material being oil, you know how oil kind of spreads out and gets away from you. The oil will kind of travel up the shaft and spread out across the surface of the skin, spread out across the epidermis. So oil tends to spread, think about the last time you left butter sitting out. Okay. So the function of the sebum is to soften the hair shaft and the stratum corneum. it keeps these structures supple, flexible, and mildly waterproof. Because it is oil, and oil and water don't mix. So it comes up the hair shaft. These dry, flaky, keratinized cells will be made softer and more flexible, more supple by the oils in the sebum. It spreads out across the epidermis, keeps that dry, cornified, keratinized tissue, dead tissue, supple, flexible, and a little bit waterproof. Sebum also contains a few mildly antibacterial substances. So another function of sebum is to at least slow down or inhibit the growth of bacteria on your skin. It's not antibiotics, it's not antiseptic, but it will kind of slow things down so you don't have big fuzzy colonies of bacteria growing all over your skin, even between showers. Secretion of sebum is controlled by hormones. In particular, testosterone. During childhood, before puberty, these glands are not very active. They have a very low level of activity. But their production of sebum will increase dramatically when the person goes through puberty. If the access, or if the duct of the sebaceous gland becomes blocked by cell debris or by bacteria, and the sebum can't move out of the sebaceous gland, it will build up inside the gland and cause swelling of the gland and inflammation of the gland. And this is what we call pimples. White blood cells may be drawn to the area by the bacteria, and now you get pus formation, gives you whiteheads, acne, red swelling, inflammation. That's the sebaceous glands. If the sebum can't get out, it's going to build up inside. And you might remember from your teenage years where you got the pimples: face, neck, upper chest. Because that's where you've got the biggest and most active sebaceous gland. Something to add, or? These glands, sebaceous glands, don't have pores. The ones that do have pores are the sweat glands, which was what I was going to say next. So you got me into that real quickly, real nicely. Thank you. Sweat glands, also called the sudoriferous glands. Because in Latin, sudor is the word for sweat. So in Latin, it's sweat glands. In Spanish, too. Someone told me that. Because, of course, Spanish is a Romance language. It is derived almost directly from Latin. These are distributed over most of the skin. We don't find any of these at the nipples and the external genitalia. You don't, yeah. So most areas of our skin have these sweat glands, except for the nipples and the external genitalia. They're kind of the exception to that. It's estimated that the average adult has around 2.5 million sweat glands. That's a lot of sweat glands. Now there's actually two types of sweat glands. There are what are called the eccrine sweat glands. These are the most common kind. Okay? These are simple coiled tubular glands with a merocrine secretion, meaning they really just produce a liquid. They're most abundant, well, you guys know where you sweat from, on the forehead, the palms of the hands, and the soles of the feet. These are the ones that open directly onto the skin, so they have pores in the skin. The duct of the sweat gland opens directly into the skin through a pore. The secretion that they produce is called the sweat. This is a hypotonic solution, meaning it's mostly water. It's about 99% water. The other 1% is a combination of salts, in particular sodium chloride. You know sweat tastes salty. Ascorbic acid, anybody here take nutrition yet?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember ascorbic acid?
Nope.
Nope.
Kind of dumb.
All right. Ascorbic acid is the other name for vitamin C. So if you're taking your vitamins in the morning, you're probably sweating out some of that vitamin C by late in the afternoon. Urea, uric acid, ammonia. Now, the human body doesn't really produce very large amounts of ammonia, so this is very much of a trace of ammonia. There isn't going to be much there. Lactic acid, according to one book I was reading, the lactic acid is what mosquitoes home in on. Living here in Florida, I think we all know that you attract more mosquitoes when you're sweaty than when you're dry. And according to the book, it's the lactic acid in the sweat that the mosquitoes can smell and zoom in on. Everybody in Florida's got their own opinion about that, but I'm just telling you that's what the book said. Okay. And something called dermacidin, which is like the sebaceous glands, antibacterial. So like the sebum, sweat will slow down, inhibit the growth of bacteria on your skin. For most people, the sweat is acidic with a pH that ranges between 4 to 6. This varies a lot, even in the same person, depending on their level of activity, their nutrition, the pH of their sweat may shift. depending on their physiology at the moment. Other stuff can show up in a person's sweat. Certain other compounds may end up being secreted in their sweat, depending on the person's genetics, depending on their diet. Some drugs will end up in a person's sweat. I've always thought that this is probably what gives elderly people their distinctive body odor, is that they're all taking so many medications that some of this is coming out in their sweat. So the blood pressure medication and the heart medication and the anticoagulant medication and the antidepressants and the anti-arthritics and the list goes on, painkillers and muscle relaxants and anti-inflammatories, and it's going to give them their sweat kind of a peculiar smell. And certain aromatic compounds in our food. Some people swear they can smell coffee on other people's sweat. I can't, but some people say they can. I can tell you that spicier, more pungent things will show up. Many years ago, I was working with a guy from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, somewhere in that area. He ate curry almost every day. Curry and curry spices were a big part of their diet in his family. And despite the fact that he was very clean, he showered every day, shampooed, wore fresh clothing, you could smell it on him. Those peppers, those aromatics were just coming out through his skin with his sweat. Garlic, it will give a person a kind of a garlicky odor to their sweat if you're taking garlic supplements for whatever reason. I don't know what people do there. If you're taking fish oil capsules, your sweat may take on kind of a fishy smell. Okay, all right. I thought you had something to say about fish oil capsules and people who eat too many sardines. Okay. Now, what controls the secretion is essentially the autonomic part of the nervous system. Autonomic, there we go. Nervous system. The involuntary parts of our nervous system. The parts that are not under conscious control. So you can't consciously control your sweating. It's a subconscious, involuntary part, but it's controlled by our nervous system. This is typically triggered by increased body temperature. So you sweat when your body temperature goes up, you sweat when you're hot, and through emotions. In particular, anxiety, embarrassment, that's spelling that whole thing out. And fear. You're anxious because you got a test coming up. You're going to sweat a little bit more than normal. You slip and fall out in the hallway and everybody sees you and starts to laugh. You're embarrassed and you start to sweat. You're walking across the parking lot with the pirates and the rapists, and you're going to start to sweat. So increased sweating due to either increased body temperature or certain strong emotions. A person will produce some sweat, however, even when they're calm, even when they're cool, even when they're not very physically active. Some sweat is produced almost all the time. And it's thought that the average person is putting out around 600 milliliters of sweat per day. Bless you. I can see by the way you guys are looking at me and just kind of slumped there in your chairs that if I try to push this any further, we're not going to get much productive done. So we'll stop here.